Hi there and welcome to the Renee Sew Along. So this is a knit garment, so you're going to need a stretch fabric to sew this in. The seam allowances are 6mm, which is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to sew this on an overlocker threaded with 4 threads of colour that match my main fabric. You can sew this on a domestic machine with a stretch stitch if you prefer. Generally the lightning stitch is a good one to choose. The other thing is you're going to need a plain stitch to sew some of the hems. You could use a twin needle if you prefer, or you could use a cover stitch machine if you have access to one as well. So when you're ready, make sure that your overlocker is set to 6mm, 1/4 inch width, and that you've checked on spare fabric that your stitches are correct, and we'll get started. So let's start with the cowl neck. Now you will have 2 pieces cut exactly the same. So let's start with one of them. So take one of them and fold your fabric right sides together, and we're going to sew this short length here. Now this is the center back. Now when we use our overlocker, I'm not going to cut any fabric off, I'm just going to use the blade just to trim any stray threads on the raw edge. Okay, so once you've done that, do exactly the same thing for the other piece. Now when you finish this one, turn it so that that seam is now on the inside. And if we look, we've got one edge that's shorter than the other. So the smaller edge is the outside edge, and the larger edge is the edge that's going to be sewn into our neckline. So take this piece, make sure you know where the seam is, and place it inside the first piece, making sure the short edge is together and that the long edge is together. So what we're looking for is right sides together, and we want to match the seam we just sewed, like that. Alright, so now we're going to overlock together this short edge to sew the back seam over the bulk. You might find it easier if you have one seam facing forwards and one seam facing back. And it's a good idea to not start directly on the seam, just start either side of the seam. As you get halfway around, you will see a notch, and you'll need to match that notch, and that notch is the center front neck. The notch there. Try not to stretch this as you go. Oh, now I haven't mentioned it for the video, but if you wanted to put drawstrings and eyelets on this, it's really easy to do. I'll mark it on the pattern piece. Basically what you'll see is 2 marks for eyelets, so you'll put the eyelets into one of the neck pieces, the outermost one, before you start, and then you just continue doing this. So you put the eyelets in so that you turn it through, and then you would stitch a line of stitching 2 centimeters, which is 3/4 inch, away from that folded edge, and that would create a channel for your drawstring to go through if you wanted to do one. So this pattern doesn't have it, but I will put the markings in if you want to do that. Sorry, this sew along doesn't have it, but I will put the markings on the pattern piece. Alright, so this is the beginning of our cowl neck here. Now this edge here is the edge that's going to be sewn onto the neck edge of our garment. if you feel more comfortable tack stitching a line of plain stitches to hold these pieces together, now's your time to do it, and make sure you match up the notches as you go. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is just put this aside somewhere safe, and I'm going to work on the cuff. Now if you are not sewing the cuff version, you can skip this next step. Take the cuff piece and find the side that has the notches on it, and then what we want to do is fold it so that the notches are together at the top and the folds at the bottom. So we're folding it right sides together, making sure the notches are at the top. We're going to overlock each of the sides. Then turn that out so that we have a rectangle, wrong sides together and right sides out. And what we're going to do is match the top edge and the edge that is closest, there's a notch close to one edge. It should be 2 centimeters away, which is 3/4 of an inch. Make sure that goes underneath like so, and we're going to lap one over the other. So the folded edge here is going to sit on top of the notch there, and now you can either pin that or tack stitch that into place to hold it into position, and then go ahead and repeat that on the other cuff. So what we're looking for here is cuffs that are facing the opposite way. So on this one the overlap is here, and on this one the overlap is there. Right, so pop those cuff pieces somewhere safe, and if you're not working with the cuff version, that's fine. We'll just jump on over to the front. So what you're going to need to start with is we need the upper front and the lower front, and we're going to sew these together through the middle line, which is the angle. So all you need to do is place the upper front to the lower front, right sides together, and we're going to match the notches as we go. You'll see a center notch. Now this is on an angle, so just be careful you don't stretch it out too much. So there's the middle notch. There's also a turning notch, 2 centimeters, which is 3/4 of an inch just before the end there. Right, so that is our front. Now on this side you're going to see a dog leg. So this is actually our button wrap. What you need to do now is find this lower piece here. Now this has a notch halfway down this edge here. So that notch there is going to match to the seam we just sewed at the side. So place these pieces right sides together making sure that notch matches in the centre, and we're going to overlock this together. You'll see this angled up piece will match. What we're going to do is just overlock that together. As we come down here, you'll see a notch here, and that will match to the notch there. And just continue right down to the end and off on the angle. Like that. So now we're going to work on the shoulders, so making sure your front is right side up with the shoulders at the top. Take your back and place it right side down. Match the shoulders and then overlock across the shoulder seams. So now we're going to work on the sleeves. When we cut the sleeves out, we cut one like this and one like this, so it's called a pair. That's because on one side we have two notches, and the two notches show us that's the back. Then we have a single notch at the top, which is the crown notch, and that matches to our shoulder, and we have another notch on the front here, which matches to our front. So what we're going to do is sew our sleeves into our garment, and I always say you have a 50-50 chance of getting this right, and no matter which one I pick up, Murphy's Law, I always pick up the wrong one. So make sure you take a sleeve and place it into the arm area of your garment. So here's my shoulder, so I've got two notches there and one notch here, and I want to place my sleeve in right sides together. Oh, I got it right! So I want those two notches to sit on top of each other there, and we'll go around and match the notches. So when you're ready, starting at an underarm, we want to match the underarm position there. And we want to ease out any fullness in between those matching points. So just when you're ready, sew that together. Before you go any further, just check your work and make sure that that is set in nicely before you move on to the other sleeve. Right, so now we're going to sew from the underarm through to the hemline down the side seam. So fold the sleeve right sides together, and we're going to start at the wrist area. Now if you're sewing the cuff version, it's still the same. We're going to start from the lower arm area. Halfway up there is a notch to match. We want to make sure our underarm points are sitting on top of each other. As we come down the side seam, you'll find a notch that matches to the seam. Make sure your seam faces towards the hemline. and just continue and sew and match notches as you go. Now come across and do the other side. Start from the wrist area. Match the notch. So as we come down the side, there's a notch you need to match there, and then what you'll notice is that things don't quite match up. So as we come down, what you'll see is there's a notch here, and then you've got this weird thing going on here. What we have to do is, this is the button wrap, so we're twisting that up by 2 centimeters, and that's going to fold on over. So what it means is this notch here is going to sit on that notch there, which is going to sit on that notch there. Hopefully that's not too confusing. If you, let me explain it in another way. If we pin this, and I don't think you should, but if we pinned that at 2 centimeters, 9/16 of an inch, that would fold back like that, making this edge really perfect. So that's what would happen, and that's what's going to happen with our button wrap. So just fold there. Make sure that sits nicely, and then fold this down here, and all of those notches are going to meet up. So if you wanted to clip or pin that into place there, and what you will see is once that notch matches up, it will match all the way down to the hemline like so. I'll just pop these in so you can see it. So that will all match up nicely once you put that dog leg in. So you just have to be careful about going over the bulk here. And if you put a clip or a pin in, make sure you take it out. So you can see the dog leg here. So that is our button wrap position, and we'll go press that in a moment, but don't worry about it for now. We've got to finish the lower edge of the sleeve. Okay, so if you're sewing the version without a cuff, just go ahead now and hem the edge of that. If you're sewing the cuff version, come to this side of the garment. So this is inside out right now, and this is the left hand side as if I was wearing it. You see that this is the front, the back, and the sleeve here. And let's just have a look at this hemline here. So here is our seam, and directly opposite our seam we have a notch. And let's take this cuff here, and this cuff here is lapped this side over. So this cuff on that line needs to touch that point there, so that's the notch there, and then the underarm seam is going to touch the notches directly opposite, and it's hopefully that's not too confusing. So the easiest way to do this is to make sure your garment's inside out, and I'm just going to make sure my cuff is right side out. We're going to put our cuff inside. I'm going to take out that lower pin because it's just going to be annoying for me. And I want to match that notch there to the seam, and I'll just repin it. And then the double notch directly opposite on that cuff is going to sew to the underarm seam at the wrist. Pin that into place there. So when you're ready, just go and overlock that into place. I'm just going to pop a couple more pins in it. Okay, to make life easy on myself, I'm going to pin them both in at the same time. So I'm coming to the other side. So here is my seam and here is the notch directly opposite. I'm going to take my cuff, pop it inside. I'm going to put the edge there. And pin. And the two notches opposite I'm going to match to the underarm seam, side seam there. Okay, so when you're ready, just overlock that into place. So you need to overlock through the 3 layers. You'll probably find it easier if you do not start at a seam. Start either side of probably the underarm seam, and make sure if you put some pins in that you take them out. So go ahead and sew the other one, and I just want to show you what it's going to look like. Oh, better remove that bit of overlocking there. Hang on, I'll just do some quality control work. Sorry about that. There we go. So that's what our lower area, oh, there's another one, is going to look like. And this is where we're going to be sewing the buttons together to hold that into place. So that's what we're looking for. Okay, so now we're going to work on the hem. If you have a cover seamer, turn up this hem and sew it at 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch, and you want to do it from this edge here all the way across to here, so it will finish tucked up like that. So you want a nice sharp finish at the edge. I'm going to seal my edges with my overlocker, and then I'm going to sew a double liner stitching with my plain machine. So let's just do that. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to run around this raw edge right on the very edge. So if you need to, go to your iron and press that, and now we'll stitch it into place. So if you are using a plain sewing machine, make sure you have a ball needle here, and you can use a twin needle on a domestic machine as well. Also make sure your stitch length is slightly longer than normal, and you might need to adjust your tensions for stretch fabric. Generally the upper tension needs to be tightened from normal. So when you're ready, and making sure that your thread matches your fabric well, turn this up by 1.5 centimeters. Now, which is 9/16 of an inch. If you've done this correctly, the turn should be right on the edge there, which is exactly where the notch is, and stitch through the overlocking line. Start directly on the edge. as you approach this other end, you'll see the notch for the turn position. What you want to do is just make sure that is in exactly the right place. I'm going to tuck up the thread within there, and I'm just going to make sure that that's sewn all the way to the edge, like that, and I'm going to back tack it there. So if you want to do a second line of top stitching, which is what I'm going to do, I'm going to sew it directly parallel to the first line on the side that I folded. And I'm doing that, it's around about 4mm, which is just over 1/8 of an inch from the first line of stitching. So now we have this last little bit here left to stitch down, and this is our button wrap. Now it's probably easier if you go to your iron, and what you want to do is measure out 2 centimeters, and 2 centimeters is 3/4 of an inch, and that is the place we want to press that over. And if you've done it correctly, what will happen is that it will all line up just nicely with this little pleat we created in the side seam. So when that is all pressed into position, so there's 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch all the way down, what we're going to do is come to the top here, and you'll be able to feel the overlocking underneath. That's the edge there. And we want to stitch through that just to hold down our button wrap into position. Now you might find it easier to do it from the back. It will of course be easier once it is pressed. So just start directly on that side seam, sew a small back tack, and we want to sew directly parallel because this is where we're going to stitch on our buttons. Stitch on that overlocking line, and if you can't feel it from the front, you may be better off to sew it from the back. We're going to stitch down. We want to stitch all the way through to our hemline. Now the edge of our hemline, let me just tuck those threads out of the way. Hang on, So the 2 centimeter position, if you've done this right, that fold there will touch the outside edge of the overlocking perfectly. Just tuck in any threads there and just stitch all the way to the end. And back tack. So that is what we're left with to sew our buttons on. If you haven't already, give that a really good press, and we will go and work on our cowl neck. To sew on the cowl neck, you'll find it easier if the garment is inside out, so wrong side out. So place your garment wrong side out, the back at the back and the front at the front, and then take your funnel collar and make sure you have it the way round you want it if you've done a contrast, and make sure it's right side out. So then just pop this collar into the neckline so that right sides are together. And what we want to do is the seamed areas where the seams are will match the centre back notch, and directly opposite the centre back notch you will have a notch, and that notch will match to the centre front. And then part way between those positions, you'll see another notch on your collar, and that notch will match to our shoulder seam there, and the same on the other side. Now before you go any further, if you have done a contrast, just double check that everything is sitting the way you want it to before you overlock that into place. And when you overlock this in, don't start directly at the centre back, just start either side of it. I always try and start just to the side of a shoulder seam, and we want to make sure when we overlock that we're going to overlock all 3 layers together. And it's really easy to miss bits, so take your time when you're doing this. So there we are, our garment is finished with the exception of sewing on some buttons. I've put suggested placement on the pattern pieces. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon for my next sew along.